Welcome to the Idea to Value podcast, where in every episode we highlight the latest insights into creativity and innovation from experts around the world. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn. I care about the evidence behind what makes ideas happen, and I've already helped thousands of people just like you through my unique insights into recent scientific findings of how creativity works. I also show you how to turbocharge innovation programs so they finally deliver on the value and ideas you've been struggling to execute. Get your free training on how creativity can be improved by registering now at www.ideatovalue.com. Now let's get on with today's episode. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Idea to Value podcast with me, your host, Nick Skillicorn. And we're very happy today to have Paul Hobcraft, innovation expert based out of Switzerland, with us. Hello, Paul.
Hi, how are you, Nick?
Very
and
good.
Hi to everybody else.
Absolutely. Now, Paul is one of the online influencers who's well known for his really detailed analysis of how innovation works within corporations. And so we wanted to talk today about one of his specialty subjects, which is called the Three Horizons Innovation Framework. But before we do that, Paul, how did you get into innovation? What's your background?
Okay, very 2 minutey. 1 minute is for 20 odd years of my life, I was in business. I was working in large corporations, which took me all around the world. I lived in Kenya, I lived in Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, Australia, America, working with different corporations, usually at sort of a general management level or higher, depending on what it was and the challenges that were there. Moved around 3 or 4 different companies, and that was mainly in the consumer goods area or in business to business. But in my time in Singapore, where I lived for about 12 years, after about the third or fourth year, I'd been working for a German consumer goods company in Singapore in a starting up mode, and we parted ways. And then I got into an MBA, and part of the MBA had at the end alternatives to what you could finish up your MBA on, and I chose innovation, and it just hooked me. So around 2002, 2003, I started to get into the subject of innovation. For the first 4 or 5 years, that was based in Asia and working with Asian companies. So getting myself a good understanding of what innovation was about, working with clients. I then moved back here to Switzerland in 2008, and I try to focus on 2 geographical spaces, European, UK included, and also still Asia. And those are the 2 spaces. But around 2010, I decided that I should start blogging and I should start getting into that whole area. So I started 2010 with my own blog. I started to get into the subject matter of innovation, and I decided to call it the DNA of innovation. That gives me a broad enough remit to go anywhere I want, whatever I want to do in innovation. It leads me into sometimes very complex parts of explaining innovation, sometimes some easy ones. And I know you've said once or twice that, they could be most probably a little bit simpler, or they could be sort of adapted in a better way that you might get a broader audience or something like this. Understood. I still work at that because it's certainly one of those areas that I get into the subject and sometimes I forget who I'm writing it for.
Yeah.
Or I know who I'm writing it for, but the problem is I'm assuming they know more than they do know. And that's a very dangerous sometimes position to be in. So that's a little bit about me.
And so what exactly do you do nowadays with companies when it comes to innovation?
Mainly, I've moved away more and more from doing the consulting side, because I find as I'm an individual here, I just don't have the bandwidth to be able to work with a client, sit in their offices for X number of weeks doing a particular project. I think there are much better equipped people to do that. Where I've tended to move myself is more into mentoring, into coaching, into advisory work. So if a board member specifically wants to understand innovation, I would work with him, or I'd work with his chosen team to try to get them to have a lot more awareness and understand of broader innovation or try to answer their specific subjects. So those could be, we want to connect innovation to digital transformation. We want to get a much better set of tools for thinking out our future innovation position. It could well be, we need to get a much better dialoguing framework within our organization. What can you do to help us? So one gets specific inquiries which link quite well into the blogs and the activity I've done. I tend to draw, obviously, a lot of my mentoring and coaching from, obviously, the subject matter that I've worked on.
And what are the sort of reasons why executives need coaching on innovation? Are there things that they usually misinterpret or misunderstand and that you need to help them understand in a new way? What sort of things do those usually entail?
I think there's 2 or 3 things to answer on your point. Firstly, I think most executives are time-starved. They just don't have the opportunity to get into the subject matter in the way that they would like to. You know, they grab the opportunity at weekends to read a blog, and of course, if they're then subjected to one of Paul Hobcraft, which could be 1,500 words, they sort of roll their eyes and say, well, maybe I'll look at that on another day, or they'll plow into it because it's specific to the subject they want to discuss. So we've got a time-starved issue. The second part is that the innovation manager or his team tends to be very transitory. It tends to move through an organization into the innovation space for 2-3 years and moves out. And I find that you lose quite a lot of then continuity. So managers come in, they believe they can do things differently, they believe they've got a different remit, they then will come back and you'll sometimes rework some of the stuff you've done with them, or you will just put a different emphasis because they believe there should be a different emphasis on their particular business at that moment in time, which could be speeding up the way innovation goes out the door, how to look at portfolio management, how to collect ideas, etc. They may have a very different take or want to have a different take on what their previous person wanted.
I think what you've hit the nail on the head there is quite often these people who come into a new position within the company and have to focus on innovation, quite often they feel there's a requirement behind it that they need to make some change. And therefore, there is quite often this reinvention of the wheel that happens, that every couple of years when either a new team member joins or especially if a new person at manager level joins, they feel like they don't necessarily need to start from scratch, but they need to take everything back to step one and put their own spin on it, as you said. And that can be, in some cases, that can be very useful, but in other cases, it can be quite dangerous. If something's already working, it doesn't necessarily need to be taken right back to the beginning.
And I think we come back to a couple of issues. One is, it isn't just their own world. There is a world of innovation change going on all around us. And because if they stop and try to take something back, it's going to take them possibly even longer to catch back up to where maybe a competitor is. There is this great danger that if they do this, reinventing the wheel or changing, I think that has its great problems for some of these companies. And the second thing is to catch back up. They might need just to be re-equipped with completely new skills. So they don't sometimes look as much externally as they should do. All they're worried about and fixated, which one can understand, is with the internal performance. They don't rate their internal performance against the market trends or the market expectations. And, constantly you get fragmentation taking place where the innovation manager has suddenly stepped out of the dialogue with customers because he's working on his innovation and he forgets. And of course, somebody else takes on the dialogue with the customer, builds a process and a system for the customer, and the two things then don't actually fuse together. They actually begin to have a sort of conflict. And then you get the next set of questions is trying to unpick what is an important side, which is the customer needs side, and then try to actually get the innovational side to understand it is. It's a bit like some years ago, you always got the belief that R&D was the special place, the only place that did innovation. to be honest, today, it's the customer-facing side that is doing a lot more of the innovational activity. And it's the innovation core team that is sometimes lagging again, very much behind what's going on at the front-facing. So it's not the back end anymore, it's the front-facing. But that innovation team tends to get squeezed because it doesn't mostly move with the changes like it should do.
I mean, it's something I've seen time and again, and sometimes just the simple things of having a consistent way of talking about innovation in a company, which is something that we worked on. That I worked on earlier last year when I was trying to get to the definition of what innovation is, and we had experts like yourself contribute your views on what innovation is, and even within the innovation community, there's thousands of different definitions. But what it really settled on was innovations creating a solution that adds value for both the customer and the company. And what it really boils down to there is you need to have the innovation teams within the company understanding what the customers might not necessarily say they want, but are going to get value out of. So having the front-facing teams working with them quite directly.
Yeah, the other thing that I was thinking about, and I've been putting a little bit more work on, is somebody asked me the question very recently about what's changed in innovation in the last few years. And I came back and I said to them, it's called divergence and convergence. The divergence has been going on for many, many years in the past. Everybody's been doing their own thing. Everybody's been taking up their own processes. Everybody's been adapting the tools they feel is appropriate. Where I think we're getting, though, is because technology is beginning to get the stability part, funnily enough. People are beginning to look for processes, look for software. And once you get into that, you're getting into a much greater possibility of stability of your process. So I think we are getting into a more converging stage when it comes to innovation. I think it's going to see us out in the next few years where technology, where software will just get better. And because of that, the process of innovation will not then be tackled on an individual case-by-case basis. It will actually be improved as a move forward. It's a bit like ERP. We hated the ERP concepts when they were brought in. It created nothing but confusion, problems, differences, etc. But after a period of time, once you settle in to the process, you go about then improving it. And I think we are getting to a point where innovation is going to be far better worked upon as to be improved upon, as against to be challenged and unpicked and then sort of reworked. And I think that divergence, convergence is maybe where we are at this moment of time.
I agree. And I think one of the things that you're specifically bringing to the table, which is one of the reasons I'm so excited about this interview, is around helping companies understand processes that they can use to better understand and manage innovation. And as I talked about right at the beginning, you've got what's called the 3 Horizons framework. And I know there's other people contributing towards it as well, but you're really one of the people on the forefront of developing this framework and methodology. So why don't you quickly let us know, what is the 3 Horizons framework and how is it useful for understanding innovation in a company?
Yeah. Firstly, the history of 3 Horizons. It was written by 3 consulting experts within McKinsey. And McKinsey wrote the 3 Horizons for a strategic view of how a company should plan out its business. And it should plan it out into the present, into the near term, and into the future. So the 3 Horizons are today's business, the near term business of maybe the next 18, 24 months, and then beyond 24 months. Now, each industry, of course, sees their horizons very differently. The pharmaceutical industry could be working 10 years, 20 years out. So it would see the 3rd horizon, the future horizon, much further out. So they looked at it from a strategic point of view. Where I took hold of it and it caught my attention was we struggle in innovation on getting out of today's current thinking. We are incrementalists by nature, it seems, most of our companies. We're looking to improve our products. Can we change our products? Can we find a framework where we can challenge how we think? So I took the 3 Horizons and said, well, we've got this medium term and we've got this long term. The medium environment is the change environment opportunity. It is the most difficult to manage, so I'll leave that and I'll come back to it. And you've got the future environment, which is where do you see yourself going? So it could well be, I've been a company that's been internally driven. That's today's business. I need to think about opening myself up and becoming more open in my innovation, which could be my next 12 to 18 months of experimenting, exploring, and getting understanding towards. But my future, I need to think about how innovation is going to be managed in a different way. I need to think about it's maybe not just my brand, but it becomes the customer's brand. How do I make it a customer's brand? Maybe by putting it on a platform or through something like that, the platform becomes the brand. Now, what I mean by that is Nike and their shoes. We had a running shoe. That's a brand. They've turned the running shoe now into a trainer, which is connected. So you can actually get a much better understanding of your own fitness, of your own ability, how much you walk, how much you use these trainers. They've also extended that out into a broader platform of saying we're connecting our trainer and our platform into the broader ecosystem of gyms all around the world, all sorts of other activities you want to do to get yourself fit. So Nike becomes not just a brand, it becomes a value statement. And it is the platform and our ecosystem that has given us a much better position as Nike to be able to do that. They've gone through the three horizons. They've gone through, I am a brand, a shoe. I am a connected shoe. That's my transformation. And I've now turned it into the future, which is the ecosystem where I have other people coming in and contributing to your wellness and your fitness. So the innovation three horizons gives you an opportunity to also put on three hats. You've got the hat of the guy who runs a business today, the operating guy, the guy that likes to keep the lights on, the guy that likes to keep efficiency and effectiveness as he's in the forefront of his mind, which is where most companies operate. You've got the guy who's more sort of entrepreneurial, who's wanting to make change to a business, wanting to challenge it. And then you've got the futurist, who's the guy who's got a voice that says, I want us to see how we can think out our business in different ways. So try to get those guys all around the same table to talk a common understanding. By having a framework like the three horizons, you can break up the conversation into mindsets of conversations where you can say, let's talk about our business today. Everybody contribute. Let's talk about our business for the next 18, 24 months and whatever. So that the voice of the operating manager tends to reduce and the voice of the futuristic begins to magnify because he sees this as an opportunity. And then in the future, for that third space, the really futuristic one, maybe you develop a number of different scenarios and it becomes the scenario discussion the futuristic guy takes, and then he draws in identification from the operating people and the sort of the entrepreneurial group, so they begin to see a clearer pathway forward for their innovation activity.
I mean, it's something that it's so vital in a lot of companies, especially, as you said, if the loudest voices are talking about the current business and its current needs, especially in companies that are run by the desire to please shareholders and to just make sure the next quarter goes well. Quite often there's less of a desire to think of the things that might challenge or change what's working right now in the next 2 years, 5 years, let alone 10 years. I don't know many companies that can successfully look 10 years into the future, but as you say, pharmaceuticals might be a good example.
I think one of the other things we've got now, of course, is there's a general acceptance or a rule of how much innovational spending do you put to today's business, and that 70-20-10 rule, which is the common one. So 70% is spent on today's business, 20% spent on the changing and extending out your existing products by taking them into an adjacent market or extending the brand and making it a broader brand. and then the 10% is in the future activity. Now that's tended to stay far more within the R&D space. I believe that could be challenged a lot better and a lot more today because technology is driving that through open innovation. That 70-20-10 is not a bad starting point, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right one. If you look at social media companies like Facebook, they're putting 20, 30, 40% into that future space. They're reversing it. They're only putting 10 or 20% into today's business because it's tweaking and improving the efficiency. They're putting a lot more of their money into the future spaces. Other companies are beginning to rethink this 70-20-10. So we are seeing, I think, a shift in how companies are judging that. The issue, the real stumbling block is, of course, is in shareholder return. And why that's become such a dominant, it still is, a dominant position. It's very, very hard for companies to come out and sort of argue for the future and argue for the unknowns as against the knowns because the shareholder wants a return. I think it's certain companies are facing up to that. Unilever has faced up to that. They've said, if you're not interested in the longer term, then don't come and invest in my company. Brave, but you know, not a bad position. And there's other companies that are equally doing that. So we are getting some change, but it's not enough to make the innovation activity move from being incremental into more radical and different. What is, the only other thing I was going to say, what is, of course, disturbing this is disrupting innovation.
Yeah.
And that then becomes a whole different ball game. But we won't go there for the moment.
Yeah, I mean, that's a topic for another day. One thing which what you've said just sparked in my mind is a lot of people who would initially hear about the Three Horizons framework and they hear your timelines that you listed of today's business, near-term business, future business. What I'm starting to think is that the Three Horizons aren't necessarily time-bound at all. So as you mentioned, some companies are looking at what's going to be a new way that our company operates in the future and that we need to invest into now or start experimenting with now. That could start bringing benefits within 6 months already. It's just trying to anticipate the future rather than saying, these are the investments we're going to make in the next 6 months. Then after those are done, then we're going to invest in these for the next 2 years. And then after that, we're going to invest in future businesses. It's more about thinking, what do we need to do in our business today to anticipate what's going to happen during these Three Horizons?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it is not just time bound. It's arguably, it is resource bound as well. In other words, how much of our resources are going to be put into managing today's business and our future business? It's a questioning framework which has got a host of opportunity to explore. It can be a scenario planning one. It can be a yearly framework that everybody gathers around and works for to map out their 5-year plan or their 10-year plan. But for me, it's far more a creative framework where people can come together and sort of say, this is a dialoguing environment. This is where we can gather together different voices, different opinions, and we can try and work through conversations that we're having and try to put them into a sensible order for our business to evolve. It doesn't necessarily mean today we need to allocate 10% to that, but if it's a good idea and we agree it's a good idea, we should start now moving towards thinking about how we're going to put money behind it, how we're going to be putting resources behind it, how we're going to be going out there and finding the expertise to drive this. It could be just very experimental. And the other thing that I think is quite nice to break the Three Horizons in, which other people are mapping this stronger than I am, for example, is to exploit is really Horizon 1, which is today's business. Explore is Horizon 3. In between, it's really expanding. It's expanding your horizon, expanding how you exploit into a future that might be different. So you're exploiting and you're exploring within that middle ground. That is a very interesting way of then introducing dual innovation, ambidextrous. Again, that's another area. But it's a very nice way of thinking about it, because then again, people understand, oh, hang on a minute, I shouldn't be talking about exploiting. I should be thinking about exploring. And again, that changes the conversation. It changes the tone. And the whole opportunity you can get within this three horizon framework, it has tremendous scope if you get into the dialogues with the people who begin to see it, begin to understand it, begin to appreciate who needs to be part of the conversation, and then the values that they can get out of it. It's a great place to tell a story. You know, my story is I've got a business that's here, I'm taking the business to this, and I believe in the future is going to be that. Again, the three horizons can take you through that story projection. It has a story sort of emphasis as well as time, as well as resource.
I think that really leads us on to the last point of the podcast then, which is if someone wants to go ahead and start getting some value out of this concept of the Three Horizons framework, in about, the challenge is always 30 seconds or less, can you give our listeners one actionable thing that they can do in the next week to start getting some benefit out of this?
Yeah, they can come and read. Because on my blog, paulforinnovating.com, if you look at resources, in there you'll see about 9 white papers summarizing all the different types of blogs or all the different types of thinking I've put together on the Three Horizons. They can go into that and they can dip. There's also a presentation on that site, so if they're visual more than they want to read, they've got a quick visual which will get them a better, quick comfort level of, this is something I need to put some time and energy in to understand because I can see its value. So you've got both there, and maybe in the future you and I collaborate and find a way that maybe I do a webinar through you on the Three Horizons, which can then allow people to think about it and then for them to determine whether they want to explore it further or not.
That sounds excellent, Paul. So one last time, what are the websites you've got, and how else can people find out more about you?
Too many websites, so forgive me for that. But the critical one is paulforinnovating.com. If you go onto that, it shows you the list of other sites as well. I have a specialized site which deals with building capabilities and landscaping. That's another particular site. I have a joint site which I run with another innovator called Jeffrey Phillips, and we talk about ecosystems and platform. That's a dedicated website. I chose to put those into dedicated websites because they're very specific subjects. But if you go into Paul for Innovating, you've got the Three Horizons in a lot of detail and a lot of understanding. And then you've got 2 company websites. One is agilityinnovation.com and the other one, which is hockerconsulting.com.
Perfect. We'll make sure to get all of the links down in the description below. And Paul, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you, Nick. Cheers. All the best.
Today's episode was made possible by members of our premium Deep Creativity Training Program. For less than the price of half a candy bar per day, you too can get world-exclusive daily exercises which push your creativity past its comfort barrier to make you better able to generate ideas in all aspects of your life and work. Invest in yourself now by going to www.ideatovalue.com/deepcreativity and using coupon code PODCAST for 25% off your first order. And don't forget that if you found this episode interesting, to like and share it, and to leave us a review in your favorite podcast player. See you again in the next episode.